So it's a rather sobering thought about what this generation is and what the effect of our miseducating them and our misraising of them has resulted in. And it brings to mind the question, what do we do next? Well, you know, I would like to give you a warm and fuzzy answer to that. I would like to give you the answer that says, okay, this generation screwed up, here's how we fix them. But frankly, I don't know if we can. I wonder if enough damage has been done that we can't make up for the last 25 years or so of our miseducation of these kids. I would hope, and I don't know how effective it will be, but I would hope that as these kids get out there into the real world, which frankly we have not prepared them for, we've done a piss poor job of preparing them for it, not just educators, not just Hollywood, although they're culpable too, but we as parents and just as society in general, we've done a piss poor job of readying them for real life and society, but they're going to have to go up to it anyway. Hopefully as they do that, maybe the real world will grab them by the lapels and shake them a little bit and shake some sense into them, because God knows we haven't done it. God knows we failed. Maybe the life experience that comes with paying your own bills and having to make sure that you have food on your table, maybe that will teach them what we should have taught them. I don't know, but I hope it does. Really, what I think we need to focus on, and where we can have an influence on the future, is that we need to focus now on raising the future generations. We've done all the damage we can with these 20-somethings. And in acknowledging that, maybe we need to use it as a lesson going forward to those kids that are still out there in elementary school and junior high and even high school, even your preschoolers, those of you who might have children on the way, and how you raise them. Maybe we need to take them away from this socialization idea. You know, if you look at almost any study that's out there about homeschooling, most of them will show you that in terms of achievement and test scores, homeschooled kids far and away outperform public school or even private school kids. And the criticism for homeschooling is that, well, the kids aren't socialized. Well, you know, maybe they don't get as much socialization, although they do get a lot. Maybe they don't get as much socialization as kids in the schools get, but by God, they can point to where America is on a map. And by God, they can do some math. And by God, they can know a little bit of science. And they can read, and they can speak English. I think that's a little bit more important than whether they know how to interact with a group. So let's focus our kids in the next generation towards actual academics and actual study. Let's go back to test scores. Let's go back to holding teachers accountable. Let's teach them actual facts and knowledge rather than teaching them how to interact in groups. They'll learn that quick enough. They'll learn that by playing out in the playground with other kids with minimal supervision, much more so than they will in a classroom. Let's teach them in all aspects of life, teach them how to rub some dirt on it. You know, it's funny to think about it, you know, these kids anymore, when we put them on a bicycle, we put them in a helmet, and we put them in all kinds of padding, and they look like the Michelin Man. They're so made up with stuff, and we're so afraid they'll skin their knee. But when you think back about it, the times you skinned your knee were the most lasting learning experiences you had. And how many times did you get a bump or a bruise in the playground and another kid told you, rub some dirt on it and get back out there. Walk it off, run it off. My God, can the next generation use some of that philosophy? You know, I think back to old school football coaches like Bear Bryant, Woody Hayes, Vince Lombardi, basketball coach like Bobby Knight, people that molded men much more so than they just produced players. And there's a rather infamous story about Bear Bryant when he was head coach at Texas A&M before he got to Alabama. The infamous Junction story where, Bryant came into Texas A&M and he saw that he had a team that had been losing for a lot of years and had kids that were essentially out of shape, and a lot of them were just there because of their family connections and whatever else, and just were not the football players that you needed to compete in the old Southwest Conference of those days. And just didn't have the firepower he needed to play with the Texases and the Arkansas that existed at that time. And he knew he had to get these kids in shape, and he knew he had to make some men out of these kids. So he took him over to a place in Texas called Junction, which was right over there just on the edge of the desert, and just ran what by modern principles would be called a brutal training camp. And a lot of kids quit. A lot of kids couldn't take it. They're practicing out there in the sun with no water, and they're getting hurt, and they're practicing on dirt fields, and a lot of them couldn't hack it, and they quit, and they left. One of the players on that team, who later became a great coach, Gene Stallings, he said, he had the great line, he said, we went to Junction in 2 buses, we came back in 1. So those that remained became men. And, yes, it helped them on the football field, but I suspect it helped them in life. And all of those guys that went through that, they still get together, and it's such a foundation moment for what they grew into as adults. And it strikes me that our coaches anymore, they're not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to build young men and young women. Instead, you got to have water at the practice, and you got to only practice for so long. And, you got to make the kids feel like they're part of practice, and you got to have fun. No, you don't. You teach sports and you teach other activities to mold young adults. So that's what we got to do. We got to stop giving the trophies out for showing up and give trophies out for accomplishment. We got to toughen these kids up a little bit. Anybody who has a toddler will tell you that every time the toddler falls down, you think they just broke their arm or their leg, but the toddler just gets right back up and keeps going. Kids are amazingly resilient. We as humans don't understand, I don't believe, the true miracle that is the human body and how resilient and tough it is. Kids don't know any better, they'll bump their head on something and keep going. But my God, we've stopped them from doing that, and I think we've had a negative result on them as a result. We've got to reduce that socialization, and we've got to reduce that dependence on the group, and we've got to reduce that cocoon and that support system that kids have been raised with now. Instead, we've got to focus on developing them as individuals. Teaching them how to accomplish. Teaching them how to persevere. Teaching them how to come up against tough situations and triumph over them. We've got to bring challenge back into their lives. We've got to teach them how to overcome challenge and put them into situations where they have to overcome challenges. Test their mettle a little bit. Make something out of them. Years ago, our parents and grandparents, previous generations, they instinctively knew how to do that. They did it without even thinking about it. But all these academics that have come along in child psychology and education that have spent all this time in their classrooms and their ivy towers and done all this research, printed all these papers and books, have essentially told us to abandon what those wise people of previous generations knew instinctively. They've told us to question our instincts and instead go with what the academic research will tell you, which is that these kids need to be socialized and they don't need to be challenged and they need to be treated as adults. And, I think we can look at this generation of 20-somethings and say that failed. It was a failure. We did them a disservice. But the worst thing we can do is to keep providing that disservice to future generations. Let's remember what our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents taught us. Let's get back to building adults, not building overgrown children. We've gotten to a point in life where I think that we treat children as adults and we treat adults as children. Our society cannot survive that way. And we're going to have to take a long, hard look at the way we raise our children and what we expect out of them as they get older, and the type of people that we expect them to be once they enter the real world. You know, I don't know if there's any hope for this generation of 20-somethings. I honestly don't know if a large number of them can become contributing members of society. It might be hopeless, but there is still hope out there for the younger ones, for those in elementary school now and those who haven't even started school yet. Let's take the time to really be critical of what we've been taught and how we raise them. And let's raise them the way that our grandparents would have raised them. And let's ignore the academics. Let's ignore the feel-good mentality. Let's ignore the temptation to be your child's friend. And instead, let's build some American citizens for once. This is America's Evil Genius. Hopefully I've given you a few things to talk about. I know we've gone longer than we usually do, but I think this should start a pretty interesting discussion in our country. We'll see you next week. Until then, Godspeed.